All right, SkullKing Nation, we are continuing our Inside Look series as we enter into NFL draft season, and our next guest that I am very excited to talk to, the voice of the Ohio State Buckeyes, Mr. Paul Keels. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Ryan. Glad to do it.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with the quarterback that a lot of people think is going to be the first quarterback taken in this draft, a phenomenal talent. Dwayne Haskins, 6'3", 220 pounds, had an amazing season, 4,800 pass yards, 50 touchdowns, 70% completion percentage. Just if you could give us just a little bit of your perspective on the kind of season that Dwayne had.
Well, it was a pleasantly surprising season, Ryan. Really, all people had seen prior to 2018 of Dwayne was some mop-up duty the year before, and then at a late stage in the game in Ann Arbor against Michigan, he had to come in and replace J.T. Barrett when he was injured and kind of keep a drive alive that helped them come from behind to win a football game. But for him to do what he did last year, nobody would have expected probably even half that production. Incredible accuracy, really took advantage of an outstanding group of wide receivers, not just from a pass-catching standpoint, but outstanding blockers, great special team players that really helped set a tone overall for this football team. And Dwayne just continued to get better and better. There were times where his lack of rushing ability became a little bit of a deterrent, but late in the season against Maryland, we saw him really take advantage of some running opportunities just to at least get a few positive yards. But a guy that, with his size, with his numbers and his accuracy, and also his flexibility with long and short passes, there's really reason to be excited about his potential moving to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, when watching his game tape, the thing that really stands out is his strong arm and the accuracy to go along with that. I mean, how many times that he's hitting, Parris Campbell, Terry McLaurin on the fly. I mean, just in stride, with rifling shots in there from 30, 40 yards down the field and even farther. Just his strong arm and the ability to just drop dimes was just an amazing thing to watch on his game film.
Well, it speaks to his physical ability, but it also speaks to the talent of those receivers, getting production out of the tight end position. The offensive line, which, probably didn't play as a group overall as well as offensive lines in the recent years at Ohio State, but a group that continued to improve. And then as the rushing threat, both from Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins, started to at least become a little more prevalent at times, that created a little bit of the balance that allowed Dwayne to have the season that he had. And I don't think you can underestimate also the influence of Ryan Day, the quarterback's coach, offensive coordinator, acting head coach for the first 3 weeks, and now new head coach. So a lot of those things were part of the puzzle that really led to Dwayne having the success that he had.
Yeah, you mentioned his lack of mobility a little bit. I think the one thing that he was able to, from what I saw, able to move around in the pocket when he needed to, but really he had a lot of what I saw. He had a lot of great protection from that offensive line. They did a really good job, from what I could tell, of keeping a pretty clean pocket for him. One of the things that I've seen kind of as a warning flag, I guess you could say, that people said is, how well does he deal with pressure because of the amount of I guess you could say lack of pressure that he got this year because of the defense, or because the offensive line playing pretty well. Just how is, in some of those things that maybe aren't on some of his highlight film, how would you say that he kind of deals with pressure in the pocket?
Well, for the most part, I thought he dealt with it very well. An offensive line is only going to be able to hold up so long, and I think certainly you look at some of the defense in the Big Ten, and there were some very solid groups there. But at times what became an issue was the lack of a consistent running threat. Once that became a factor, that helped in that area, and I think also too the receivers being able to get open. You mentioned Parris Campbell. He was a guy that they did a lot of things with fly sweeps and shovel passes, and was a player who could really do an outstanding job once getting the ball in his hands, then adding yards after catch. So there were a lot of components that went into that, but overall felt like he did a very good job of dealing with pressure and reading what the defense was providing.
Yeah, he's it's definitely going to be interesting to see where he goes with some of the quarterback needy teams coming early in this draft, to see where he goes and maybe if he could if he goes to say somewhere like the New York Giants, are they going to continue to use Eli for another year and get, Dwayne a little bit of time to kind of learn the system and get into it before, throwing him to the fire? Or does he end up with a team that, they don't have much of a choice? He is going to be the starting quarterback. So I think it's definitely, again, his arm talent, honestly, what exudes to me as confidence in his abilities, definitely I think is going to play very, very well in the NFL when he gets his chance.
Well, he's a very well-spoken, very polite, kind of a quiet young man. And his leadership, from the way the coaches talk, did improve in the huddle during the course of the season. But, he's a guy with natural ability that will, at least there's reason to be optimistic. He'll do well whether he has to learn for a time behind somebody. And, a great example of that was how he learned being a backup to J.T. Barrett. If he goes to a team where he's put into a situation where he has to play right away, there's reason to be optimistic, provided that there's the right pieces around him. So, I think there's a lot of signs that point to good things for Dwayne Haskins moving forward. All
right, well, let's go ahead and move on. You talked about how the running game kind of improved as the season went on. Mike Weber, next guy we want to talk about, running back, 5'10", 214 pounds, had just under 1,000 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, averaged 5.5 yards a carry, was able to catch the ball a little bit out of the backfield, I see, about 21 receptions. Kind of give us an overview of Mike Weber from this past season.
A young man that really benefited from a redshirt freshman year to be able to get himself physically where he needed to be and learn the offensive system that Ohio State had. A guy that has 1,000 yards in his career a couple of years ago, got close to it this year, really improved as a blocker, as you mentioned, his ability to catch balls out of the backfield, and just a very, very competitive young man. It was pretty apparent as the season went on that he was most likely going to forego his final year to go pros, but a guy that at times showed some good breakaway ability and really showed the ability to get some of the tough yards when needed between the tackles.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that, again, watching some of his game tape, really solid base, can be slippery in tight places when he needed to be. You talk about his toughness. He really looked like he, when he needed to, ran through contact. He would initiate contact with linebackers and defensive backs, would keep his legs churning. Definitely he ran very aggressively, especially when he really needed to get those extra couple of yards.
Well, and that sums up Mike Weber, and certainly it benefited him to have another tailback in J.K. Dobbins to be able to absorb some of the load and some of the physical pounding that they take in the Big Ten. A young man that had to deal 2 years ago at the beginning of the year with a hamstring injury that somewhat limited him, but ran motivated, ran aggressively, pass protected very well, because that was something that Ohio State's coaches put a high premium on. It was a standard that Ezekiel Elliott set and really took it to a high level. But a very much a positive influence as far as a running back.
Yeah, and you just looking at his size, 5'10", 214, it has a little, or it's not what you would call like a bowling ball stocky build, but definitely a solid build for his size to be able to take some of those hits and to be able to deliver some hits as well as a running back. The one thing I noticed that he's not a burner. He has the speed to hit the corners or to hit the edge when necessary, but he obviously isn't one of those guys that's going to just outrun everyone. He's going to get a lot of the tougher yards.
Given the opportunity, he can break away from defenders, and we've seen that over his career. Not just a tough runner, but a guy that can be elusive, and given the chance, he can do well when it comes to having to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, and like I said, his ability to slip in and out of tight spaces to really get going, is very, very impressive, especially for a guy that tends to be, like you said, a tough runner. The ability to be slippery, and then at the end, like, he's not gonna blow people away, but he does have that extra gear, it looks like, to get away from especially defensive backs moving down the field. So again, another guy that to me, it looks like he may, with some of the running back talent that's in this draft, maybe more towards that end of second into the third day, but definitely someone that I think that could be a contributor. Definitely a contributor to an NFL team.
You summed it up. Couldn't agree with you more.
All right. And the last guy that we want to talk about, the wide receiver, Parris Campbell, 6'1", 208 pounds, Really looked like a phenomenal season. 90 receptions, 1,000 receiving yards, 12 touchdowns, and like you said, used a lot on like the jet sweeps. Kind of give us a little bit of kind of your perspective on Parris Campbell.
Well, first off, one of the most wonderful young men that you would ever have a chance to meet and speak with. Just incredibly polite, energetic, just a guy that you're glad to be around when you get a chance to be around him as a person. What people have to remember, Parris was a high school running back. And when Urban Meyer was recruiting him, he actually was recruiting another player on his team while Parris's high school was playing in the state championship game, and got really to notice his ability and his breakaway speed. So Ohio State brought him in as a receiver after he'd been a running back in high school. Had to deal with some concussions early in his career, but a guy that really had to learn how to be a receiver, learn the nuances of routes, pass blocking, things like that. Was used at a time in his career as a kick returner, but a guy that really was able to do some exciting things with running the jet sweeps, being able to at times line up in the backfield. His speed getting away from defensive backs and really being able to catch passes, whether it was from J.T. Barrett or Dwayne Haskins, made him a deep threat anytime he was part of the consideration of the play. And a guy who really also excelled in special teams as a gunner on punt plays. So he's a guy that really is going to get an opportunity just because of his physical ability, his very engaging personality, and because of his statistics to really get a good look at doing some things in professional football.
You mentioned his speed. I saw I did a little bit of look up on him. As a 13-year-old, said that he ran a 4.340. Talking about his track abilities as they were getting ready to, as he was getting ready to go into high school. How he is an absolute burner. I did an interview earlier about Marquise Brown from Oklahoma, and there's a lot of debate about which of those two guys is faster. Just the absolute speed that Parris has to get down the field, to pull away from defenders, really is an absolutely impressive.
Well, you can't coach speed, and he's got that. And not only when it came to catching the ball, but also his ability to be able to influence plays with blocking. To be able to cover punts. That was one of the things that, not only just Parris Campbell, but Terry McLaurin, they really excelled at, and was really part of setting a great example amongst the Ohio State football team about how to not only play the game, but practice the game.
Yeah, talking about blocking wide receivers, being from Seattle and seeing the Seahawks, there are a lot of teams that, especially if they're a little more run-oriented, that the ability to block from the wide receiver position is so key for a lot of those kinds of teams. And it again, seeing watching one block, especially in Mike Weber's game tape, where Parris kind of came down and sealed the edge and basically took out two defenders at the same time to give Mike a chance to get upfield and gain I think it was 40 yards. Definitely, shows his tenacity. And I think what helps him is being 6'1", 208 pounds, having a little bit of that size is going to help him in those blocking things as well.
Well, that's something that really has been a staple since Urban Meyer got here. He constantly makes reference to Evan Spencer, a receiver who was on the 2014 national championship team. And the example he set is a blocking receiver. And that's something that they've continued to harp on in that position room. And guys, certainly when you think about how Parris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, and some of the returning receivers that they have coming back for 2019. That's something that those folks have understood. They've got to be able to work at that to be able to get on the field and get passing opportunities. And Parris Campbell was a guy who benefited from that.
All right. Well, do you have maybe just a couple minutes to just give a couple words about Terry McLaurin, since he's also been invited to the combine and has been vaunted. Some people say that he's one of the top 100 recruits. Would you have just a couple minutes to just a couple thoughts on him?
A lot of the same things about Parris Campbell, an outstanding young man, a guy that has certainly in the last 2 years of his career shown the threat that he can be as a receiver, whether it's intermediate routes or being able to get beyond people and get by defenders, an outstanding blocker, and a guy that just really worked at making himself an outstanding college football player. Came in with great credentials out of Indianapolis, but really just continued to slide up the chart as far as his acumen at performing, playing in the game, practicing the game. Maybe not the blazing speed that Parris Campbell has, but a guy that certainly has been a big part of why Ohio State's offense has had success in recent years.
Yeah, he was definitely a guy that, looking at his toughness, he has very, very strong hands. Seeing what he was able to do with contested catches, with defenders on his back, and seeing his focus and his strength in those types of situations was definitely was very good to see.
Well, and again, a young man that when people get a chance to interview him and talk to him, they'll be impressed by who Terry McLaurin is.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, we want to thank you, Paul, for taking the time to join us to talk about these players. As I've said at the end of all these interviews, it's exciting for me to get a chance to speak with people who have seen these players up close and had a little bit more of an intimate view of what these players can do. So again, Paul, thank you so much for giving of your time for us.
My pleasure, Ryan. Glad to do it.
All right. You have a wonderful day.
All right, take care.
Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.